Most players, after their first fine, go quiet. After the second, they issue a carefully worded statement through their agent. After the third, they hire someone to manage their words for them. Sophie Cunningham got fined 3 times in 6 weeks. She laughed about all 3 on her own podcast. And she came back the following season saying the exact same things that got her fined in the first place. The league keeps sending the bill. She keeps paying it. And somehow, with every fine that lands, her fan base gets louder. Not quieter. That alone should tell you this story is not what it looks like on the surface. The easy version writes itself: player breaks rules, league issues punishment, player learns lesson, everybody moves on. That version is clean, simple, and almost completely wrong. Because what is actually happening here is something stranger, more interesting, and honestly more revealing about the WNBA as an institution than any single fine or podcast comment could ever be. This is the story of a veteran player who decided the price tag was worth it. A front office that never once asked her to stop. And a league still trying to figure out what to do with someone who refuses to play along with the part of the script that says you accept the punishment quietly and move on. To understand why any of this matters, you have to go back to the moment that turned Sophie Cunningham from a respected veteran into something closer to a symbol. It was a June game in 2025. Indiana Fever versus the Connecticut Sun. The kind of mid-season matchup that would normally disappear from memory within a week. During a scramble for the ball, Sun forward JCS Sheldon made contact with Caitlin Clark's eye area. It was the kind of play that happens fast, gets lost in real-time chaos, and often goes unaddressed. What did not go unaddressed was what happened next. On a later possession, Cunningham fouled Sheldon hard under the basket. The kind of foul that does not require a press conference to explain what it meant. Both players were ejected. The Fever survived the drama and won 88-77, advancing to the Commissioner's Cup championship game. But the result almost became secondary to what that ejection represented. In one sequence, Cunningham had communicated something that no amount of carefully worded post-game comments could have matched. She saw a teammate take a hit that the officials did not address, and she addressed it herself in the most direct language available to her on a basketball court. That moment built a level of goodwill with Fever fans that followed her for the rest of the season and well into the next. She was not the most decorated player on the roster. She was not the one the cameras followed down the tunnel. But she was the one who answered when nobody else did. And that is the kind of thing fans remember long after the box score is forgotten. What makes that moment the foundation of everything that came after is not just what she did. It is the consistency it revealed. Because the same instinct that pulled her towards Sheldon on that possession, the refusal to watch something happen and say nothing, is the exact same instinct that would eventually cost her hundreds, then thousands, all in the span of roughly 6 weeks. The first fine arrived in July of 2025, and it came from the direction nobody quite expected. Not a post-game press conference. Not a heated locker room interview. A TikTok video. Cunningham posted a clip of herself lip-syncing to a pointed line directed at WNBA officials. It was sharp, it was public, and it cost her $500 almost immediately. Most players at that point would have deleted the clip, drafted a quiet apology through their representation, and treated the whole thing as a lesson in social media discipline. Cunningham's response was to go on her podcast and talk about it. That podcast, Show Me Something, had just launched. Its debut episode became the source of the second fine. She used the platform to call officiating inconsistent and to question, directly and without much diplomatic cushioning, what exactly a $500 fine was supposed to accomplish. The league answered that question by tripling the number. The second fine landed at $1,500. The message from the league office was clear: escalate the rhetoric, escalate the consequence. Cunningham's response to the escalated fine was essentially the same as her response to the first one. She kept talking. The third fine came less than 2 weeks after the second. This time, the trigger was a specific game involving Dallas Wings rookie Paige Bueckers. Cunningham said publicly that she felt there was a noticeable gap in how whistles were being distributed, that Bueckers was receiving a level of favorable officiating that she did not see her own team getting in comparable situations. The league did not publicly disclose the amount of this third fine, but Cunningham confirmed it herself on air, laughing that she was now officially 3 for 3 on being fined by the WNBA in a single season. 3 fines, roughly 6 weeks, and not once did the tone of her commentary shift toward caution or retreat. If anything, Each fine seemed to function less as a punishment and more as confirmation that she was talking about something real enough to warrant a financial response. Here is where the story gets genuinely unusual. Because the way Sophie Cunningham finds out about a fine is not what you would expect from a league disciplinary process. The league does not call her directly. There is no official on the other end of the phone delivering the verdict. Instead, the league emails the Fever's front office. And the person who ends up passing the news along in person is Indiana Fever General Manager Amber Cox. According to Cunningham's own account, told more than once on her podcast, Cox pulled her aside after the second fine of the season in front of the rest of the team, and told her they needed to talk. For a split second, Cunningham said she assumed she had done something wrong in a different sense entirely. A missed assignment, a technical she had forgotten about, something concrete and correctable. Instead, Cox smiled and told her the league was fining her again. That detail, Cox smiling while delivering news about a financial penalty, is the kind of small human moment that completely reframes the larger story. Because that is not the reaction of someone delivering devastating professional news. That is the reaction of two people who have been through this exact conversation before, who both understand roughly what is coming, and who somehow arrive at a place where the whole exchange carries more dark humor than genuine alarm. Cunningham has described Cox's tone in those moments as almost amused. Not a manager confronting a problem player. Not an executive concerned about the optics of repeated fines piling up on her roster. Closer to a colleague breaking slightly awkward but entirely expected news to someone she has clearly decided to trust rather than manage. Think about what that actually means. A general manager whose job includes protecting the organization's relationship with the league office is smiling while telling one of her players she is about to lose money for the third time in a matter of weeks. That does not happen if the organization is quietly hoping she will settle down. That happens when an organization has looked at who a player actually is, decided that version of her is worth more than a quieter alternative, and accepted the fines as simply part of the arrangement. What Cunningham said on record about officiating was also more nuanced than the player attacks officials framing that tends to follow these stories. She acknowledged in the same conversations where she was criticizing officiating patterns that the official's job is difficult. She said so explicitly. Her complaint was never that officiating is easy work done badly out of laziness or malice. It was narrower and more specific than that. She was frustrated that a particular pattern of contact, one she watched happen repeatedly and visibly in front of everyone on the floor, kept going unaddressed, and that raising it publicly seemed to be treated by the league as a bigger problem than the inconsistency itself. That is a meaningfully different argument than a player simply venting frustration after a tough loss. It is a structural critique delivered by someone who has spent 7 seasons watching how games get called at this level. And she was not alone in that critique, even if she was one of the few making it under her own name on a platform she controlled, repeatedly, without walking any of it back. Compare what happened inside the Fever organization to how this kind of situation typically resolves itself across professional sports, and the contrast is stark. The standard playbook when an athlete draws league discipline looks something like this. The fine or suspension is announced. Within 24 to 48 hours, a statement appears expressing respect for the league's process and a commitment to moving forward more carefully. A coach or team executive appears on camera expressing confidence that the player has learned from the experience. The player themselves gives a version of an answer that contains no new information and offends nobody. The story fades. None of that happened with Cunningham. There was no agent statement walking anything back. There was no coach quoted urging her to be more measured. There was no carefully constructed non-answer designed to make the story go away. There was a general manager smiling in a hallway and a player laughing about it on her own podcast a few days later. By the time the 2026 season arrived, Cunningham had an entire offseason to reflect on 3 fines, a pattern that had drawn national attention, and the question of whether any of it had been worth the cost. The answer she arrived at, based on what she did the very first time the opportunity presented itself in the new season, was unambiguous. In late June of 2026, during an episode of her podcast, she addressed an incident involving Phoenix Mercury forward Alyssa Thomas making contact with Caitlin Clark's throat area during a game. Contact near a player's throat going uncalled in real time. Cunningham said plainly that she believed opponents were specifically targeting Clark, and that officials were not doing enough to protect her from it. Outlets covering the Fever flagged almost immediately that she was risking another fine. The same language, the same category of complaint, the same pattern of raising it publicly rather than letting it sit. A full year had passed from the last round of fines. An entire off-season had come and gone. And her position had not shifted by a single degree. She was also collecting technical fouls at a rate that suggested the new season was heading towards the same destination. Her third technical of the year, which carries its own $500 fine under league rules, arrived during a separate game against the Mercury around the same stretch. Two separate paths toward that same hallway conversation with Amber Cox, both active again within days of each other. What is notable about all of this is not that Cunningham said something controversial. It is that an entire year of reflection led her back to the identical conclusion. If the fines from the previous season had functioned the way disciplinary systems are supposed to function, she would have returned to the new season with at least slightly more caution. Instead, she returned and raised the exact same category of concern about the same underlying issue, aimed at protecting the same teammate, apparently deciding over the off-season that the previous year's approach was entirely correct and worth repeating. There is also a layer to this story that the league office probably wishes would go away more quietly than it has. Shortly before the 2026 season began, the WNBA publicly acknowledged that officiating had needed improvement following the previous year. The league entered the new season having essentially conceded that the problem Cunningham had been fined for describing was a problem worth addressing. Cunningham caught that acknowledgement immediately and addressed it on her podcast, half joking that the league might owe her a refund. Strip all the institutional context away, and what is left is a fairly simple explanation for why Fever fans, and Caitlin Clark fans more broadly, have claimed Cunningham as one of their own. She has never positioned herself as the most gifted player on the roster. What she has offered instead is something specific and increasingly rare in professional sports. A willingness to say the quiet part loudly under her own name, on her own platform, at her own financial cost, without retreating when the consequences arrive. There is a version of this story that frames it as a cautionary tale about impulse control. That version exists, and it is not entirely without logic. 3 fines in 6 weeks is a meaningful number. The financial cost is real. The distraction risk is real. But that version misses almost everything that actually makes this dynamic worth watching. Because the more accurate version of this story is not about a player who cannot control herself. It is about a veteran who made a deliberate calculation repeatedly that saying something true out loud was worth the price the league was charging for it. A front office that evaluated that calculation and decided not to interfere with it. And a league still working through the question of how consistently it wants to enforce its own rules. That is not a story with a clean resolution. It does not end with a lesson learned or a system corrected. It ends where it is right now, which is mid-sentence. One fine at a time. One hallway conversation at a time. Whether fine number 4 changes any of that is the only question left open. Based on everything that has played out so far, the answer seems fairly obvious. What's your take on Sophie Cunningham's fight with the league? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want to stay on top of every twist and turn in the WNBA, make sure to hit that subscribe button for Hoops Uncovered. We'll see you in the next video.